Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day to you. Thank you very much for joining our webinar this afternoon. My name is Busles Banyoni from Legal&Tax, and I'm joined by three very lovely ladies who are qualified and experienced legal advisors here at Legal&Tax. I'd like to welcome Vuyoka Zimbela, Simone Bodley, and Sonia Wesi. Thank you very much for joining me, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today we celebrate love and romance, and couples around the world will rejoice and reclaim their love for each other, starting from small gestures to some pretty grand romantic ones. And in today's webinar, we focus on the critical relationship between love and the law. We'll be discussing cohabitation between those in a relationship, helping you understand your rights as a cohabiting partner, and also debunking the myth of the common law marriage. We want to help you understand also the different types of marriages and marriage agreements that exist. And lastly, we look at the process of divorce to see what happens when things go south and you now wish to dissolve your marriage. Legal&Tax is your partner in love, and we're here to help you navigate all the matters of the heart. With Legal&Tax, you're not alone. Please feel free to type in any questions that you may have for our experts to answer at the end of the session. We'll definitely open up the floor for questions. So please use the chat function that's available on the platform to submit any questions that you may have. So Sonia, I'll start with you regarding the issue of cohabitation and common law marriage. Firstly, what is cohabitation?
Cohabitation. Okay, thank you so much, Busles. When we talk about cohabitation, in simple terms, it's when two people stay together as though they are married, although they are not married because they did not comply with the legal requirements of marriage. So they are in a long-term relationship, but have not complied with the laws that regulates marriage. So that is basically cohabitation.
Okay. And then what is considered common law marriage, and what is the current status in the country? Because there are a lot of opposing views. Some people are under the impression that if you live with a partner for, let's say, 6 months to a year, you are automatically considered to be under a common law marriage. It's just a myth that has not been debunked. So I want you to actually share with us on what the current status is regarding that.
Okay, let me start by saying that we don't have such a thing as a common law marriage. It is merely a misconception that is there. We don't have such a thing in the South African law as a common law marriage. And because we don't have it, there is no legal status, or if I may say, the legal rights conferred to such, because it's not existing in a legal system.
So I understand that something that would be equivalent to that is the Civil Union Act. Can you explain what that entails?
Okay. When we speak about the Civil Union Act, it is an act of Parliament of South Africa which has legalized same-sex marriages. I mean, the whole purpose of the act was to also cater for people in same-sex marriages. So now, the other thing that you need to understand when we speak about a civil union, it is basically a union which can be concluded or entered into by people who are of the age of 18 years and above. So a minor cannot enter into a civil union.
What happened? Are you starting?
Okay. And then in terms of now you find yourself in a situation where you are cohabiting with someone, what rights does someone have in that arrangement? You know, anything could happen. For example, if your partner dies and you're not married and there's nothing that's set in stone, what are some of the legal rights that someone has access to in a cohabitation situation?
In a cohabitation situation, because remember I've already stated that they are living together as though they are married, although they are not married. So now the rights that they have, basically when it comes from a perspective of marriage, they do not have any rights. So they cannot enjoy the same rights as those who are in marriage. So they absolutely don't have any marital rights. So there are no rights when it comes to cohabitation from a perspective of marriage. I'm not saying from the perspective of human beings as having rights, but from the perspective of marriage, there are absolutely no rights that flows.
Okay. So in the event that your spouse does pass away, you don't automatically inherit anything. They would seek maybe the person's next of kin in order to receive their estates. Is that accurate?
Okay, let me answer that when it comes to the estate. It is not an automatic right. You still have to prove to the court that you were in a life partnership with this person. We had a recent constitutional court judgment on this matter. I think it came in December. It's still new. So previously they could not even get anything from the estate. So now, as we stand, the position is that they can inherit from the estate of their spouses, provided that they can prove that they were in a life partnership with the deceased.
Okay. And then in the event that the couple decides to get married and the guy will propose and there's an engagement, is an engagement legally binding? So, I mean, things happen and sometimes a person will renege, and want to pull out and doesn't want to go forth with the marriage. Is an engagement legally binding? Where if you have promised me, you have to honor your word?
It's not legally binding, unfortunately. That is the current status as it is within our law. Previously, one could sue for what we call a breach of promise. But as we sit here, it's not binding. So it's just one of those unfortunate situations whereby we can say that if you are engaged and somebody decides to pull out on the engagement itself, then there are no legal recourse.
Okay. And then, towards the end of your relationship and you decide to call it quits and you have no cohabitation agreement in place, how do you split up, your assets? Maybe you purchased a house together. You probably, went half on furniture and all sorts of, assets. How do you then split that up between the two of you?
It's a problematic situation, but obviously from the legal perspective, when it comes to an issue of splitting things in a cohabitation, it's just a matter of approaching the courts. And in the process of approaching the courts, you will have to prove as to why you say you are entitled to a certain asset. If you say that you purchased perhaps maybe a fridge or whatever the case may be, it's a matter of proving it. So you see, when it comes to cohabitation, it has a sense of burden because you just have to approach the court and prove it. So it's a court bridge.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sonia. Simone, I'd like to move over to you and look at the different types of marriages and marriage agreements that exist in our country, especially. So please just take us through what are the types of marriages in South Africa?
Okay. In terms of the types of marriages, you have in community of property, out of community of property. Those are pretty well known. Then you also have your customary marriage, civil union, and a religious marriage. Those are the main types. But all of these, funnily enough, when you get your marriage certificate, they will all say civil. So don't panic. It just means that you were married in a civil sense, whereas in the old days you could get married by an army captain, you could get married at sea, and that actually just changes it. But all of them are considered civil marriages.
Okay. And what are the general requirements for a valid marriage?
Okay, in terms of the general requirements, I'm only going to speak broadly because there's a long list of things, and luckily if you have a marriage officer, they kind of fill in most of the blanks for you. But mostly you have to be 18 to give your own consent. In terms of Sonia's the Civil Union Act, you have to be 18. You can't be younger than 18. If you are younger than 18, you need permission from your parents to get married. Okay, the marriage needs to be lawful. Okay, so back in the day when there weren't as many people, people used to marry off their cousins to each other and things like that. So obviously those are not lawful marriages because you can't marry your first cousin. It's from second upwards.
Yeah.
I can't believe I have to explain that, but that was a thing. And then you need to have a marriage officer to officiate the wedding or the union. And they have specific things that they have to say and specific things that they have to do.
Okay, great. And then now let's move over to, the more traditional customary side. There's always drama and issues, and it's a lot of, I think, gray area for the common person. So I would like for you to please explain to us, what is a customary marriage, what is a religious marriage, what like legally, what really makes it valid. I'd like to pose this question to you.
So I'll begin with a customary marriage. So a customary marriage is a marriage that is entered into in terms of custom or in terms of customary law. So, for example, if you are Xhosa in South Africa, certain steps have to be taken into account before you are considered a married Xhosa woman, right? So the first would obviously be, the Wola negotiations, but that's merely just the first step. So if your potential husband only paid lobola, then you are not considered married as yet, right? In order to be considered married, the groom's family would have to your family would have to introduce you to the groom's family. They welcome you, they give you a name, they dress you up in a certain manner, they slaughter a goat for you, and they introduce you to the ancestors. So until that step has been reached and that ceremony has taken place, then you are considered married in terms of customary law, right? And now a religious marriage. So basically a religious marriage is a marriage that is entered to or solemnized according to one's religious beliefs. So for example, that would be a Hindu or Muslim marriage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Back to you, Simone. Now, I want us to look at the different types of marriages that exist in South Africa. And you did mention, one of them being married in community of property and out of community of property. Can you please highlight like the differences, highlight some of the pros and cons that are associated with both?
No problem. So let's start with in community of property. In community of property, it says it in the name, you're all in. So as a colleague of mine likes to say, and as I like to explain to a lot of clients, remember when you turn 18, you have freedom of choice. You are legally allowed to enter into a contract, legally allowed to enter into any agreements. When you get married in community of property, that falls away. You actually, if you are a married woman or a married man for that fact, you cannot buy anything expensive without your spouse's consent or without them standing right next to you. So I don't know whether that's a pro, because to me it's a con.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so then out of community of property works a little different. That means that what's mine is mine and what's his is his. So, for example, I have my own estate and he has his own estate. What is different from in community property is I don't need his permission to do anything. I can get debts in my own name. I can buy things in my own name. The only thing with out of community of property is there are two different types, because with out of community of property, you specifically have to sign a contract, because the default type of marriage when you get married in South Africa is in community of property. So you have to specifically opt out, is what I call it. So that means you have to conclude an agreement. And then with out of community of property, yes, your estates are separate, but depending on what kind of anti-nuptial contract you enter into, what kind of agreement you have with your spouse, depends on how it goes moving forward. But the principle is still the same. What's mine is mine, what's his is his.
Okay, so what are some of the benefits of entering into an anti-nuptial agreement?
Okay, so an anti-nuptial agreement, you have to be a bit more specific here, because with an anti-nuptial agreement, it regulates what happens during the marriage. Okay, so for example, you have two types, which is in community with accrual and without accrual. Okay, so that contract is a huge benefit when it comes to the end of the marriage and during the marriage, because like I said, what's mine is mine and what's his is his. That means that if debt collectors come after my spouse, they can't come after me. I think that's the biggest one. It's usually very beneficial to people who run their own businesses. That would be the best example.
Okay. And then if you don't, beforehand think about putting an anti-nuptial in place, you have the prenup. Is that a simple also process to kind of, put in place and for both parties to agree on?
Okay, so prenup is actually a misnomer in South Africa. It's called an anti-nuptial contract, or an ANC. Okay, so prenup is American. It's the same thing. It's a contract you enter into before marriage.
Okay, great. No, sorry. I meant to ask about the post-nuptial agreement.
Oh, okay. So post-nuptial agreement, I don't wish on my worst enemy. It is a very difficult thing to do because you have to physically apply to court, and that is not magistrate's court, it's high court. The reason for that is it's changing your status as a person and your spouse's status as a person. So if you were married in community of property and you now want to opt out and be out of community of property, both of you have to together apply to court with a post-nuptial agreement, and you need to have very strong reasons why you did not enter into it before you got married. And if the court then agrees with you and grants that, it will only be operational from the date of the court order, the date of the judgment, which means you'll be in community of property up until, let's say, today, and then from then on out, your estate will be separated, which means the court actually has to divide your estate like you're getting divorced, which is a very hard thing to do, and it's very complex sometimes.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then lastly, in the event that one of the spouses is a cheater, which happens, does adultery affect an antenuptial agreement?
No, not at all, unless there's a clause relevant to it in the agreement. And if there's a clause in your antenuptial contract agreement regarding adultery, you shouldn't be getting married in the first place. Then there's something wrong. So in America, the adultery clause is very common. Here, it actually isn't. It's not common at all. So if there is adultery and there's a divorce proceeding, the court will still operate in terms of your ANC, the other antenuptial contract.
Okay, great. Thank you, Simone. Vuyo, let's move over to you. So now we've spoken about when things are still hanky-dory and you're in love and everything is perfect, which is what today is about. But things do take a nosedive. Divorce rates have been up, especially in the last 2 years. What are the grounds for divorce in South Africa?
Okay, so our courts look at two main grounds. Well, the only grounds. The first would be the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. So now there are different factors that contribute to that. For example, adultery. Or if, for example, you have to prove to the court that you have not lived together as husband and wife for at least a period of 1 year, right? The second one is mental illness or continued unconsciousness. For this one, you also have to prove to the courts that, for example, my spouse has been admitted in a mental institution, or they have been in a coma, for example, for a period of 6 months or more. So those are the two main grounds that our courts look at.
Okay. And then how is your property and your assets divided upon divorce?
Okay, this depends on the matrimonial regime that applies to your marriage. So for example, if you are married in community of property, it means that the two parties have a joint estate. So now, if you are separating by mutual agreement, let's say, you both agree that you no longer want to be in the marriage, then you have a pre-divorce discussion, I take it. So you would then decide that, okay, since we agree that we're getting a divorce, you decide what you want to do with the house. Do we sell it and split the proceeds? Do I, as the mother, for example, who has minor children, I will stay with the house because we have minor children, so I need to stay with the children in the house? Or are you going to take the contents of the house? Are you going to take the car? So usually couples have that discussion before they initiate divorce proceedings. But in the event where the couple is married out of community of property, then it's easy. I mean, what mine is mine, what his is his.
Okay. And what sort of costs are involved in initiating this kind of process? And who is actually, obligated to pay, if I may?
Okay, so there are two processes, right? The two divorce processes. We differentiate between unopposed, formerly known as uncontested divorce, and opposed, formerly known as contested divorce. So if we are going the unopposed route, we agree, nobody's contesting anything, we've had this pre-discussion, then we can use services of one attorney who will assist us to draft a settlement agreement, right? But in the event that the divorce is contested, there are issues in dispute, then it's advisable that parties use different attorneys. So I, as a person who initiated the divorce proceedings, I can hire my own attorney, and the other party wants to
defend the divorce can hire their own attorney.
Okay. And can you get divorced without an attorney?
Absolutely, though it's advisable to get one, but you can. So what happens is that you can approach the courts, the regional court, and the clerk will basically give you what we call a pro forma divorce summons, right? That comes along automatically with the settlement agreement, right? So then you just complete the summons and you serve it to the other party, and then you would only have to pay the sheriff's services to serve the summons on the other party. But essentially, you don't pay for anything apart from paying the sheriff for their services.
Okay.
But, sorry there. But then if the divorce is opposed, then it's different. It's different because now you will serve the pro forma summons, but now the other party defends. And most people don't know our civil law or our civil procedure at the court, so you won't know what paper will follow, if that you have to plea, counter plea, whatever the case may be.
Okay. And then, in the event that somebody financially cannot pay an attorney, but would like to go ahead with the divorce process, what are their options?
So you may approach legal aid for assistance, or you can go to any of the law clinics in our main universities. You can also approach probono.org. They can assist you for free. Yeah.
Okay. And what does the judge, I think, or the is it the magistrates, but I'll call him a judge. What does he consider in a divorce, and can you actually be denied a divorce?
You can be okay. Let me not say deny, but the courts can prolong it. Let's say, for example, if your factors are not convincing enough, right, or the presiding officer can see that, there are chances of the parties reconciling. They will, for example, suggest that you go for marriage counseling. So maybe after a few sessions, if you don't reconcile or solve your problems, then you come back to court, and then the judge can grant the divorce. But there are instances where the courts are like, no, because, our courts are very, very reluctant in breaking up, family units. So that's why they do that. That's why you have to bring convincing factors to the courts before they can grant a divorce.
Okay. And now I think we're all aware another very touchy area is the issue of, child custody. What should people be informed about when they are in such a predicament? What is the best option for both parties when it comes to the children, and obviously working around parenting rights and co-parenting?
When it comes to children, when it comes to, married couples, usually the divorce does end up being messy. We take our interest, we put our interest before the interest of our children, right? So like I said, sometimes parties do fight, but sometimes they separate mutually, right? So let's say our divorce is mutual. We'd obviously have a discussion, like I said, and decide that, okay, I'm going to stay with the children, and I'm going to, have primary residence of the children. But in the event that there's a dispute, the other party wants to take the children, but the other also wants to take the children, then we give the courts the decision, the power to make that decision on our behalf if we can't decide who the children will stay with. But again, the courts will rather refer the matter to the family advocate. So what the family advocate will do, they will investigate the matter, interview the children, they interview the two different parties, and then they will compile a report and make a suggestion to the court who is better suited to have primary residency of the children.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. And I see that we don't have any questions or comments from our guests. So I think that's where we'll leave it for today. But please join our upcoming webinar, which is taking place next week, Thursday. And there we'll be unpacking the budget speech, which is happening on Wednesday, the 23rd of Feb. So join us the following day, which is on the 24th of Feb, where we'll be unpacking everything that goes down, all the events of Wednesday afternoon. If you need any assistance related to what we've discussed today, or any debt issues, tax issues, any legal issues apart from what we discussed today, please call us on 0860 587 587. You can send us a WhatsApp. We have a bot that's accessible 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The number there is 071 526 8527, or you can send an email through to info@legalandtax.co.za. I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, ladies, for joining me. Thank you to all our guests. I hope you enjoy your Valentine's Day celebrations. I hope you're spoiled rotten, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you and goodbye.